that's the way the fallacies arise. And it's not just debate tactics. A lot of people call it debate training. And irrational personal bias that goes forth. Now, back to the broadness of your question. It may seem like a lot of minutia has been presented here. It sort of seems secondary, but this is really what we're dealing with when it comes to any kind of communicative approach, which is why I focus on diversity in style and in message in many ways, as best I can within the bounds of my own ability. I'm only one person, which means I stick with my comfort zone, even though I'm very ambitious within that comfort zone. And I hope other communicators out there do the same. I have done the gamut of writing technical books, having formal lectures, on my own multiple podcasts over the years, debates, interviews, other people's podcasts. I've made feature films, both narrative and documentary, a online web TV series type show that was satirical, comedy. I've done live stage performances with music and multimedia and pure abstraction with instruments. I've run the gamut as far as I know, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be the most successful in this form of communication. And when it comes to youth culture, speaking to your question, Instagram, social media, TikTok, maybe somebody can go out there and try to make a TikTok account that talks about structural change and get the youth aboard. I don't think I'm the kind of person that can do that. I frankly hate social media across the board, but that's irrelevant to this conversation. It's going to take a mixture of people, young and old, with different disciplines, to get out there and find their niche. That's all I can really say about that, because what you're dealing with is a statistical problem. Since this pollution of semantics, fallacies, and so on is so replete, it's basically random in terms of who is going to absorb information and continue to carry the torch versus others. What I do know is that straight intellectual treatments, formal expressions of those treatments, and books and lectures, and the most academic approach is not going to work. It has to be something different in terms of getting behind people's egos and fears and trying to plant ideas in their mind as opposed to imposing them. But I really believe the arts and intellectual development have to be hand in hand. I don't think people change based on reason, they change based on experience. The fundamental problem is that people's daily life, their experiences, the values that have been ingrained, the practices, the repetition of this way of thinking in this kind of social system is so much more powerful than a fringe subculture that's presenting new ideas, regardless of how defendable and logically sound and beneficial and critical those ideas are. Question number 2. Quote, "Hi Peter, I understand your point that extreme monetary wealth today creates structural violence. The billionaires of the world could end poverty if they wanted to. However, is it possible to identify where this symptom ends as we go down the socioeconomic ladder? In other words, is it also violence if a middle-class person buys a new pair of shoes instead of using that money to buy a meal for a homeless person on the street? If so, should we all just walk around in rags for the sake of making sure our less fortunate population has a roof over their head?" Close quote. A great question, because it highlights what could be called a kind of matter of degree fallacy or continuum. So you have billionaires on one side, and you have people in destitution not getting their most basic nutrition and other needs met, homeless on the street. where is the moral line in how much wealth one can have as compared to another? Put another way, where in a person's interest to improve their own quality of life materially does it become socially negligent? Relative poverty, living on less than $5.50 a day. Let's reduce those extremes. How about, say, a common middle-class person? They have a house, a car, a white picket fence. Yet around the corner from them is a subsidized housing project with people deeply struggling every day to simply put food on the table. What degree of responsibility or moral aptitude relates to this more fortunate middle-class person in contrast to the lower-class person? And hence, what degree are they negligent if they increase their standard of living without helping others? And there's no simple answer. There can only be a gray area, but on each side of that gray area, the moral sensibility becomes far more clear due to many other justifiable public health reasons. In other words, the problem with reasoning matter of degree or continuum problems is that they can't be solved by simply considering the abstraction itself. They have to be put into reality. In other words, there's a continuum of relativity here, and within the confines of that, as if it's in a vacuum, there is no answer. But that's not the way things work in the real world. And it speaks to one of the most fundamental problems of philosophical writing, the use of abstraction and only abstraction, when the truth is we live in a systemic reality with integrated overlapping factors. Before we continue that particular subject, let's jump to a parallel example to get this framework a little bit more clear, at least I hope it does. The debate on abortion. The debate on abortion asks the question of where, from conception to death, does civilization recognize human life as a protected entity? What is life? The most extreme conservative position is that human life begins at conception when sperm meets the egg, and then life terminates when a person's body ceases to function and dies. That's the continuum. And if that's all you're willing to take into account, if that's all you're willing to recognize, a narrow, myopic abstraction, as if life exists and ends in a vacuum, then no lines obviously can be drawn. But again, that's not how things work in the real world, as much as religion would like to believe that it does. There's a whole range of intersecting, socially relevant factors, such as, say, the health of the mother. If we're going to be absolutist with the conception of life, what happens when the fetus threatens the life of the mother in the process? How does that moral dilemma get solved? The answer is very straightforward. The mother is more important. The fetus has no social responsibility or conception of it. It has no bonds outside of the mother in abstraction. It has no one to rely on it. The death of a mother could mean immense suffering for friends, extended family, and if the mother happens to have other children, obviously the ramifications are clear. In this particular scenario, and I know this is going to sound controversial, human value is assessed by the importance of that person in the social sphere, in the society, and the relationships therein. You can't compare an average complex adult with responsibilities, taking care of this, having an occupation here to society, and all the other ramifications, to a fetus that has absolutely no connection to any of that yet. I would even go so far, just to make this point in extreme, I would define a human being as a social relationship as opposed to a biological one. And again, I say that to make a point. Human life. Because there's a subjective gray area in that very concept as well. But in the extremes, once again, it's absolutely preposterous to equivocate a fetus that's unborn to an adult with responsibilities, social connections, relationships, and so on. Going back to the main point here, there is the overlapping quantifier. There is the thing that brings it out of the vacuum of the philosophical or moral abstraction. So with that in mind, let's now jump back to the question of this range of inequality and what is appropriate or not. So what interceding qualifier, so to speak, draws the lines to clarify what can be considered moral or not? And the answer rests in epidemiological study of public health. Instead of trying to draw rigid lines, let's simply analyze the entire phenomenon of economic inequality itself. Public health research has shown definitively that there's a litany of negative public health outcomes in societies with high levels of economic stratification. And the lower you find yourself on the economic ladder, the worse your health becomes on average, for many complex reasons. I've talked about the negative effects of socioeconomic inequality a great deal over the years, so I'm not going to repeat myself too much, but it's not fringe. Well-established, multi-decade-long studies have been done on various attributes related to sociological conditions of economic inequality. Naturally, I recommend the book The Spirit Level and other works by Richard Wilkinson to start, but there are many other theorists at this time. It's common knowledge in the academic community. The bottom line is that the more economic inequality in any society, the larger the spread, the lower the general health of that society, including the structural violence that ravages the lower class disproportionately. More unequal societies have more violence, more drug addiction, worse educational scores, less trust, as compared to more equal societies. And the factors are too numerous to list here. So what does that mean? It means that any person that willfully positions themselves because of their good fortune to make disproportionately more than others, maintaining that disproportional wealth, is distinctly harming that society, and specifically the lower class who suffer the brunt naturally of the negative side effects of inequality, as per the epidemiological research. Jeff Bezos in his position is not just a selfish prick. He is an active feature of general societal sickness on the epidemiological level. The decision the rich make to maintain this economic elevation is a truly toxic phenomenon and a danger to society. It's destabilizing. It is toxic. It means that any interest we have across all walks of life, across all gray areas, to reduce economic inequality by all actors is always going to be the morally appropriate thing to do if you have any consideration for the well-being of others. The public health ramifications are crystal clear. So it becomes a general gesture, a moral gesture for the sake of the health of others to pursue equality in whatever way we can. And I know what the Ayn Rand libertarians would say to such a comment. Everyone's going to live in a carbon copy house and have a number. Everyone has the exact same thing. It's some kind of propaganda reel of Soviet communism or whatever. And it's not the way you frame this. It's not the way it's going to be. Everyone has different needs and wants. There's no one shoe fits all in the complexity of civilization. But those variants do not justify the cost of inequality we see today. And as a general attitude, people need to feel the moral obligation to be generally materially equal. To improve your society and your own health by extension. Which is why in my new film, Into Reflections, I refer to socioeconomic stratification as an allergy to human society. We are allergic to it. It simply makes us sick. It's the general effort to see more economic and hence socioeconomic inequality in society, because that is what is going to help civilization move forward in a positive way. Everything else is creating sickness. And that does it for me today. I apologize for only getting to 2 questions, but I'll be back next week for more. Thanks a lot, everybody.
I still don't have what it takes. I must train harder.
Let's pick up the pace!
Fire!